Welcome to Miyconst Hardware. During the last year we had some severe problems with the silicon shortages, especially with the graphics cards. That's why it was really hard to assemble a budget-friendly gaming or even working computer if you need to buy a modern CPU and a modern graphics card. Even the second-hand prices for the graphics cards were completely outrageous. Unfortunately, this year we look back at those problems and think that they all were imaginary, because now Russia decided that it is time to bloodbath Europe and implement USSR 2.0 or maybe Fourth Reich. Of course, I could have expressed myself much stronger, and I have reasons for that, but YouTube doesn't like strong language, thus I'm going to be short. Please support Ukraine, support your country, and we need to defeat this Russia Reich together. With this, I'm going to move on to overview the most interesting and the most valuable AliExpress offers for the Q4 of 2022. I'm already sick of repeating this in basically every AliExpress video, but I have to say it. I'm not in any way affiliated with the AliExpress sellers or with any Chinese manufacturers. I do not promote for them, and I do not get any compensation from the AliExpress sellers or from the Chinese manufacturers for my work. I do use AliExpress affiliated program, and when you use affiliated links in this presentation, I may or may not get a few euro cents or maybe 1-2 euros for your purchase. Sometimes I get nothing, sometimes I get something. So if you want to support my work, use these links. But you shall never trust my links, because AliExpress is not a safe place for shopping. I always recommend to go to AliExpress as the very last resort. First, you need to evaluate your local options in your local stores on your second-hand market, and only if you can't find anything reasonable or everything available in your local stores is completely overpriced, only then I recommend to go to AliExpress. I already have a dedicated video about AliExpress shopping experience and how to win AliExpress disputes, thus I'm not going to repeat all of that again, but if you're interested, link to the video will be in the video description. With this, I'm going to start with the most budget build that you can assemble using AliExpress. So for this entry build, I have selected this combo, and it consists of Huananzhi X99QD4 motherboard, Xeon EFI2640V3 CPU, and 16 gigs of RAM. And for this entire set, you would have to pay only 111 euros plus about 5 euros for delivery, so total about 116 euros. And I consider it to be a very good deal. Then for the cooler, I would go with this low-profile cooler. It is actually not very low profile, but it is also not as tall as a tower cooler. Why I like this particular cooler is because it's designed in such a way that once you install it in the right position, it will blow air onto your VRM. And with the Chinese X99 motherboards, it is extremely important to keep your VRM cool. I have personally assembled a few dozens of X99 computers using this low-profile cooler, that's why I can recommend it to you, and it costs only about 18 euros, so if we pick fixed color, 4-pin fan, yeah, it costs about 18 euros, slightly less than 18 euros. For the GPU, I selected this NVIDIA GTX 1660 Super. When I prepared my slides, 1660 Super and 1660 Ti were available, but they are basically the same. Both of them have 6 gigs of video memory, and the performance is very similar. This MLLSE official store, this is not the manufacturer, this is just an AliExpress store. They have 96% positive feedback, which is not bad. The graphics card itself is produced by the same factory that is producing the RX 6600M that I have already tested. I have also tested RX 5500 XT from the same factory. Thus, even though I did not test this particular 1660, if I would be limited to AliExpress and if I would be buying for myself and I would have budget of somewhere around 130 euros for a graphics card, then I would buy this 1660 Super because it's probably the best option right now available. For the SSD, I would go with a Kingspec SATA SSD for 1 TB, and for that you would have to pay about 50 euros. Why I would go with the Kingspec is because this is a rather big store on AliExpress, and I have got a bunch of their SSDs. Even though all of the SSDs had different controllers and different memory chips, All of these SSDs are still working and still working fine. Yes, it's not the best SSD, but it is also not disastrously bad. Also, why I would pick SATA instead of NVMe is because Chinese NVMe SSD drives, Kingspec, X-Ray and other ones, they have compatibility problems with the Chinese X99 motherboards. Thus, if I'm not buying as a set SSD with the motherboard, I would pick SATA SSD for Chinese X99 motherboard. And for this entire build you would have to pay somewhere around 315 euros. I think it's a very good offer, especially if you keep in mind that it's almost entire computer, and with this specification you would be able to play every modern game at 1080p with reasonable FPS and reasonable graphics. And if you have a little bit more money to spend, then I would first upgrade the CPU and I would pick E52680V3. It's the same combo as the previous one, but the CPU is E52680V3. This one has 12 cores and the gaming performance is somewhere around or somewhere between Core i3-10100 and Core i5-10400. The price is slightly more expensive though, we will have to pay about 137 euros, 133 for the combo itself and a bit extra for the delivery. Then for the graphics card I would go with this Soyo RX 5700 XT. And the graphics card right now costs a bit less than 170 euros. So when I made my slides, the graphics card costed 175 euros. Right now it's even cheaper. And that means that there are lots and lots of these RX 5700 XT graphics cards in China. And actually, I am already getting lots of propositions from local miners from Sweden, from Poland, and from other European countries, where they are trying to dump these 5700 XT graphics cards for really cheap. And sometimes it is close to these 170 euros, even if the graphics card is already in Europe. And actually, I'm thinking if I shall just buy one and do a video about it, because the offer is just very, very attractive. The graphics card itself looks very basic, but at the same time pretty nice, and the Soyo Global Store has 97.5% positive feedback, thus I would trust this store my money and would buy this RX 5700 XT for 8GB video memory for myself, again, if I would be limited to AliExpress. 5700 XT is significantly faster than GTX 1660 Super, so this combination would be able to play games for you for the next year, maybe even 2, maybe even 3 years. The total price would be a bit more expensive though, it would be about 385 euros. The rest of the components I didn't change. Now, if for some reason you do not want to buy the Huananzhi motherboard, then you can do in parts. So you could pick E52666V3 for about 40 euros and Machinist X99 MR9A motherboard for about 80-81 euros. And here I would recommend to buy ECC registered memory because the X99 platform may have compatibility issues with the cheap Chinese DDR4 memory, actually not just Chinese, but cheap DDR4 memory in general for 4 and 8 banks modules, but that's another story. Anyway, if you're buying separate memory for your X99 motherboard, I recommend to buy ECC registered memory for better compatibility. In this case, you're getting about the same performance as E52680V3, but you're buying CPU, motherboard and memory separately, and the price is also slightly higher. Thus, personally for myself, I would go with Huananzhi and E52680V3, but if for some reason you want a full ATX motherboard with the 2 PCI Express X16 slots, then Machinist X99 MR9A is a good option. Now, if you have even more money to spend on your computer, then I would completely remove the X99 platform and go with something more modern. In this case, I picked Core i3-10100F, and right now it is costing only about 72 euros on AliExpress. Even though the CPU has only 4 cores and 8 threads, it is performing very close to Xeon E52680V3 that has 12 cores, and in certain games which use only 1.5 CPU cores, this i3 will be actually faster. For the motherboard, I have picked this Soyo B560M for about 90 euros. The VRM here is good enough for Core i3 and Core i5 CPUs, but I would not install here Core i7 or Core i9, so not the best motherboard, but it's okay. And for the memory, I picked this S-Card DDR4 3600, so 2 sticks, 8GB each, you're getting 16 gigs of DDR4 3600, not bad at all, and for that you're paying only 47 euros. Of course, some will complain that the memory is white and not black, but I believe that performance is the most important, and when you're playing games, you're looking on your monitor and not inside your chassis, so I would still pick this memory. So what else I have upgraded in this configuration? This is the SSD. This time we have 1TB of NVMe storage. It is still king spec, and why king spec? Well, because it's one of the most reliable AliExpress SSDs. It's still not as reliable as, let's say, Crucial, Western Digital or Samsung, but it's not as disastrous as some might think. So for 1TB you would be paying 60 euros, it's slightly more than 1TB of SATA storage, but it is also significantly faster. So all in all, for this combo you would be paying about 470 euros, and it's still not a bad offer. You are getting very well made gaming package that will last for about a year, 2, maybe even 3 if you upgrade your i3 to i5-10400 next year or in 2 years. Another possible option if you have a bit more money, if AMD AM4 platform. Here I have picked Ryzen 5 5500 for about 106 years. This CPU already has 6 cores and 12 threads, so compared to i3 it will be significantly faster, and it actually performs somewhere close to i5-10400 or i5-11400. For the motherboard I have picked Maxun or Soyo B550M. This motherboard I did not test myself, but I have tested multiple other Maxun Soyo motherboards, and I have also seen reviews for this motherboard, so I'm feeling pretty confident to recommend it to others. So for the motherboard we are paying about 88 euros. The rest is identical. We have the same memory, the same cooler, the same graphics card and the same SSD drive. The total price for this build goes up to 503 euros, but we are getting AMD AM4 motherboard with the possibility to install Ryzen 7 5800X 3D in the future, and this is one of the best gaming CPUs, at least at the moment. The next step would be Intel LGA 1700. Here I picked Core i3-12100F, and right now the CPU costs about 110 euros. And even though this i3 also comes with just 4 cores, the overall performance of this CPU is on the level of i5-10400, i5-11400 and Ryzen 5 5500. Actually, in many games this CPU is even beating Ryzen 5 5600. So this quad core is really good for gaming, so don't worry that it has only 4 cores. For the motherboard I picked Maxun B660M. And this B660M motherboard actually has pretty decent VRM. I have tested it with i7-12700K and it handled it well. So in the future you will be able to upgrade to i5 or even i7 and the VRM will handle it well. The motherboard costs about 100 euros, so with the same RAM, the same cooler, the same graphics card and the same SSD, the price goes even higher to almost 520 euros. But again, we're getting a much better platform. The LGA 1700 has many upgrade options and not just Ryzen 5 5700X 3D. And if you want to spend even more money but still insist to buy your gaming computer on AliExpress, then I would do the following. For the CPU, I would pick i5-12400F. This is the same CPU as i3, but it comes with 6 cores and 12 threads. So you are getting enough cores, enough threads, and each core is very strong. The CPU itself is rather expensive though, it's about 171 euros. For the motherboard, I have the same Maxun B660M, the same memory, 16 gigs DDR4 3600, the same CPU cooler, but the graphics card is now upgraded to Sapphire RX 6700 XT. Again, I would not recommend to buy this graphics card if you have good second-hand options or you have some sales in your local stores, but if you're limited to AliExpress and you want to buy something of this caliber, then I would pick this Sapphire graphics card. Even though the graphics card is used and most likely or even definitely it is an X-mining card, I would trust Sapphire graphics cards more than some unknown Chinese brands, even though the graphics card is used. For this 6700 XT, you would have to pay about 333 euros. And even though the store has only 95.7% positive feedback, I would still bet on it and would still buy it, simply because I didn't find anything better for this money that I would feel as confident to buy and as confident to recommend. Maybe I have missed something, maybe some new listings popped up, but when I searched, this was the most attractive option. All in all, this configuration would cost you almost 800 euros, and if you're spending this much on a computer, I believe you can increase your budget to about 1000 euros and buy something decent from your local stores. Still, if you want AliExpress, then here you have it. Now let's talk a little bit about the individual components. I will start with the motherboard plus CPU combo, and some of these come with memory as well. The first two attractive options are of course the Huananzhi X99QD4 motherboards that I have already mentioned. Motherboard plus E5-2640 with 3 plus 16 gigs of RAM, and for that you're paying just 115 euros if we take into account the shipping cost. And if you want to upgrade your CPU to 12-core E5-2680 V3, then we have to pay, I need to open the correct page, this one. Then we have to pay about 133, actually about 138 euros. So I believe these two options are pretty interesting. You're getting a combo which is guaranteed to work together, and this is a good starter kit for rather little money. A few interesting options are also available for the AMD AM4 platform, and the first one is this Povzun or Soyo B550M motherboard with the Ryzen 5 3600. Ryzen 5 3600 performs about the same as Ryzen 5 5500, and even though it is 300 series, not 500 series, you don't really need to be worried about. It's the same level of performance as i5 10400 or 11400 or i3 12100. So for this combo you would have to pay about 200 euros, which is not bad, especially if you really want an AM4 motherboard for some reason. Another option would be interesting to those who want to use integrated graphics or iGPU. This is the same B550M motherboard, but this time we have Ryzen 5 4650G, and this G means that the CPU has integrated AMD Radeon Vega graphics card. This combo also comes with 16 gigs of RAM, and for this set you would have to pay about 250 euros. Another interesting option was with the Ryzen 5 5600G that is significantly better than 4650G, but now this combo been upgraded and it does not have memory anymore, so it's just the motherboard plus CPU. Here we are paying 236 euros without memory, and here we are paying 250 euros with memory. Still, if you want the latest 5600G with the best integrated graphics, then this is an attractive option. Intel LGA 1700 also has a few attractive options on AliExpress. The first one is this Povzun B660M Challenger with i3 12100, and total you would have to pay about 210 euros. I believe it's a very interesting option. Then the other one is exactly the same set, but this time with 16 gigs of RAM. For this combo you would have to pay 271 euros. You could save about 5-7 euros if you buy memory separately from a different store, but if you want to have something that is definitely working together, then you would have to pay the asking price of 271 euros. And the last combo I would bother about is the same set, but this time with i5 12400F. For this combo you would have to pay about 333 euros. The next slide to cover is about CPUs, and here of course we need to start with the Intel Xeon E5 CPUs, simply of how cheap they are these days. So what do we have here? The first one is E5 2630 V3 for less than 8 euros. This CPU has 8 cores, 16 threads, and with the Turbo Boost unlock, all 8 cores will be running at 3.2 GHz. So for just 8 euros, this is a very great value. It's just such a shame that the X99 motherboards are costing so much right now, but still, it's a very good value. The better one is E5 2640 V3. It has 8 cores, 16 threads, and 3.4 GHz clock frequency, but the price is more than double. You would have to pay a bit more than 18 euros. Much better value option is E5-2660V3. This CPU has 3.3 GHz frequency but 10 cores, and it also supports DDR4-2133 compared to DDR4-1866 for E5-2640V3, while the price is just a tiny bit more expensive, almost 20 euros. Another interesting option is E5-2670V3. This CPU has only 3.1 GHz frequency, but it comes with 12 cores, so if you are mostly interested in productivity and not that much interested in gaming, then this E5-2670V3 for just 15 euros is a very good value CPU. Another CPU you could be interested in is E5-2690V3 for about 44 euros. This CPU has a 3.5 GHz boost frequency with 12 cores, and the performance will be somewhere around i5-10400, 11400. In some games better, in some games worse, depends on how good the game is optimized for multi-core CPUs. The last Xeon E5 I would bother about is E5-2697V3. This CPU comes with 14 cores and 3.6 GHz max turbo frequency, so this is the sweet spot in terms of clock frequency and number of cores for the LGA 2011 version 3 platform. The CPU costs almost 80 euros, thus I would not bother with this CPU if you're building your system from scratch, because for about the same money you can buy i3-10100 or i3-12100. But if you already have an X99 system and you're looking to upgrade your CPU, then this E5-2697V3 could be a good option for about 80 euros. For the AMD AM4 platform, I have picked only two CPUs. The first one is Ryzen 5 5500 for about 106 euros, which is not that bad. And the other one is Ryzen 5 5600G. It's the same Ryzen 5 5500 but with integrated graphics, but you would have to pay about 124 euros. This CPU would be good if you want to use integrated Vega graphics and you don't want to buy a graphics card. Otherwise, I would just buy Ryzen 5 5500 and do not overpay. For Intel LGA 1200 platform, I picked four CPUs, very similar ones, but still. So it's i3-10100F for just 72 euros and i3-10105F. It's basically the same i3-10100F but a slightly higher clock frequency for 75 euros. Then we also have i5-10400F for about 110 euros, and we have i5-10600KF for about 180 euros. I would personally not buy this KF CPU because I don't bother with overclocking, and i5-10400 is more than enough, and if I would be paying this much, I would rather buy i5-12400 instead, but if you really want an overclockable CPU, then this one might be an interesting option. The last two CPUs to cover are for the Intel LGA 1700 platform, and of course this is i3-12100 for about 110 euros, and i5-12400 for about 170 euros. 170 euros is a bit too expensive for the 12400, but i3-12100F for about 110 euros is a very good deal. The next slide is about graphics cards, and here I have lots to cover, so I split it in three sections. Tier 0 is basically the entry level for the ultra budget gaming computers, and here we start with these AMD RX 580 graphics cards, but here you shall not be misled. This RX 580 is actually not 580 because it is 580-2048 SP. This graphics card is based on AMD RX 470 and was only released inside China, so do not expect to get performance of a standard RX 580. Still, for about 76 euros plus shipping we will get somewhere around 82 euros. This Huananzhi RX 580 1248 SP is a not bad option for the most budget-friendly gaming computer if you're limited to AliExpress deals only. The same graphics card you can buy under the brand name called Tieshou. Again, Tieshou, it is not manufacturer, it's just an AliExpress store name or AliExpress brand name. It's basically the same graphics card, the same RX 580, the same 8 gigs of RAM. So same graphics card, just different package. Another option is this used Sapphire RX 590. Even though the graphics card is used, it is from a known brand, and at least when the graphics card was new, it was of a decent quality. The store though is kind of sketchy. It has only 92% positive feedback, thus I do not feel confident to recommend it to you. If I would be buying for myself, I would buy this one instead of the RX 580 2048 SP, but I know how to replace the thermal pad, I know how to win AliExpress disputes, I know how to clean the graphics card, and I basically know how to deal with it. If I would need a graphics card to assemble to my customer or to my friend to just plug it into the computer and let it be so it just works, then I would go with this Huananzhi version. I have tested a couple of Huananzhi graphics cards and I do not have any quality issues with them, so I would just buy this Huananzhi. Yes, it's a bit of a less performance, but it's also a bit cheaper and much less issues than with a second-hand graphics card from not very reputable store. The next tier of graphics cards represents the mid-level, and I find it to be the most attractive on AliExpress, at least right now, and here we have quite a few interesting options. So the most interesting options are these RX 5700 XT graphics cards. One is being sold under the Soyo brand, and the other one is being sold under the Tiesho brand. The same graphics card I have already recommended in my builds, so even though I did not test the graphics card myself, it looks pretty decent and the stores have pretty decent reputation, and for the price of just about 170 euros, if we take into consideration the shipping cost, RX 5700 XT is a great deal. So if I would be limited to AliExpress and I would be searching for a graphics card of that level of performance, I would go with this one, even though it's always a risk when you're buying something from AliExpress. Now, some other options would be these RX 5600 XT if for some reason the 5700 XTs are sold out. Unfortunately, it's only 10 euros cheaper than the 5700 XT. Actually, it's not even cheaper than 5700 XT. Thus, I see no reason to buy this 5600 XT. Only if the 5700 XTs are sold out and this one left. Another potential option is this Sapphire RX 5700 XT from another store. It has slightly lower positive feedback, but still above 95%, and this Sapphire card is a used one. Unfortunately, the price is also kind of significantly higher, 213 euros instead of 180 euros. So if I would be buying for myself, I would still buy this Soyo one, just because I'm curious to see how it performs, but this Sapphire might be an interesting option as well. Another potentially interesting option is this MLSE RTX 2060 Super. The graphics card is not bad on its own. 2060 Super performs close to RX 5700 XT. It also comes with 8 gigs of video memory, so for about 193 euros it's kinda not a bad option. But I know for sure that this graphics card uses second-hand GPU die and second-hand memory chips, thus I don't feel very confident to recommend it to you. Still, if you're one of those guys who believe that graphics card is always supposed to be NVIDIA, then this might be an interesting option for you. Also, I can mention again that this MLSE official store has nothing to do with the production of the graphics card, it's just an AliExpress store name, and from the GPU cooler over here I can see that it's produced by the same factory that is producing the RX 6600M and the RX 5500 XT that I have tested. So the quality should be okay. The problems might be because of the second-hand GPU die and the second-hand memory chips. So what else have I picked here? And here I have picked this Tiesho RX 6600M and the Sapphire RX 6600 XT. So this RX 6600M is the graphics card I have already tested on the channel. The price went down to about 192 euros if we take into account the shipping, maybe even like 190 euros. And overall, this is a very attractive option for the price. The problem though is that I have received a couple of messages from my subscribers that they have got the graphics card with the cooler without the heat pipes. And when this graphics card has a cooler without heat pipe, and as you can see in my review and in these pictures, this cooler is not thin stacked. It's just one large aluminum piece of a cooler. Let me see if I can find some better pictures over here. So this is just an aluminum piece, it is not a thin stacked cooler, and when it also does not have the heat pipes, the graphics card starts to overheat, and that's a problem. So I can no longer safely recommend you this graphics card, because you may receive a graphics card with heat pipes or without heat pipes. If you decide to buy it, I would recommend you the following. Leave your seller a message that you are buying a graphics card that contains heat pipes inside the cooler, and if he does not have any such graphics card, then please cancel your order. I always do like that if I'm not sure in the product description, or I'm not sure that I will get what is described in the product. Later on, you can use your message as a proof in an AliExpress dispute that the seller sent you not what you wanted and not what you paid for. So it is what it is. The other interesting option is this Sapphire RX 6600 XT. 6600 XT is noticeably faster than the vanilla 6600, but this one is a used card and it is available in two options, the Sapphire RX 6600 XT Pulse and the Nitro. The Nitro or Nitro, it costs almost 300 euros, and I consider it to be a bit too expensive. The Pulse one is about 275 euros if we take into account the shipping cost. I still consider it to be a bit too high, but if you do not want to buy the unknown Chinese brands, then the 6600 XT from Sapphire might be an interesting option. The store also has 97.3% of positive feedback, so I could risk on and buy this Sapphire Pulse graphics card. This one is Nitro actually, this one is the Pulse, and I personally think that the Pulse graphics cards from Sapphire, they look pretty nice, so the cooler itself is much better than the Chinese cards, and it also looks more pleasant. It also has official Sapphire support, so you decide. Personally, I would not buy this card, I would just buy the 5700 XT, which right now costs just 170 euros, but you are free to decide what's better for you. And the last tier is the tier 2, which is considered to be or supposed to be like high performance tier. Here I have only 2 entries and one is actually an invalid entry. So the first one is this Sapphire RX 6700 XT that I have already recommended in my builds for about 333 euros, but not the best store, only 95.7% positive feedback, not too bad, but also we can see that there are some oopsies with this store. Anyway, I picked this card not because I consider it to be a good deal, not because I think you shall buy it, but just because I couldn't find anything better of this performance level and for this price point. Okay, and the last option is this TSO RTX 3070M, and as you can see, I have marked it as red, and this is because I do not recommend this graphics card, but I had to include it because people keep asking me about this 3060 and 3070M. The problem is that NVIDIA mobile graphics cards ported to the desktop variant, they do not work with the official NVIDIA drivers, and to make this graphics card work under Windows, you need to talk to your AliExpress seller and ask for a modified driver to be able to run your games under Windows, and that means that you do not have any driver updates in the future, and it also means that at some point Windows 11 or Windows 12 may just decide, okay, we are no longer supporting modified drivers which are not signed by NVIDIA, and you will be in a big trouble. That's why I only recommend you to buy this graphics card if you're a Linux user or if you're a miner. If you're a casual Windows gamer, then please do not bother with this 3060 and 3070M graphics cards, even though some might think that about 300 euros price tag for a 3070M is an attractive offer. As I said, please just don't buy them if you don't know what you're dealing with. The next slide is about the motherboard, and of course we need to start with the X99 options. The first one is of course the X99 RS9 from Machinist. The motherboard itself is not too bad, but the VRM unfortunately is a bit too weak, and EFI2640 V3, maybe maximum EFI2666 V3 I would recommend here. Right now the motherboard costs about 65 euros. I still consider it to be a bit too expensive, but if you are looking for the ultra budget gaming combo, then you can combine it with the i5 2630 V3 that costs less than 8 euros and pick up some second-hand cheap DDR4 memory, and then you will get a very decent entry-level gaming computer. The other options I picked is the Huananzhi X99 QD4 and the DDR3 version of the QD4, which is QD3. This motherboard has a much better VRAM, and you could install here 2680 and 2666 V3. Both of the options are costing about 75 euros if we take into account the shipping cost. Well, a bit on the expensive side for the Chinese X99 motherboards, but that's what we have to deal with and compensate with the cheap Xeon CPUs. The last X99 motherboard I picked is this X99 MR9A from Machinist. This time we get a full-sized ATX motherboard with the two PCI Express X16 slots, so if you need that, then go for it. And I actually think that this black and like lime color looks better than this black and red, but this is just my personal taste. The VRM here is also okay, but unfortunately the price tag is almost 80 euros, so I would go for the bare minimum what you need, and don't overpay if you don't actually need two PCI Express X16 slots. Now for the AM4 motherboards, I picked these two. The first one is this Maxun or Soyo B550M motherboard, and the price tag is about 88 euros. I consider it to be pretty bad because in Europe I can buy branded motherboards for about the same price, so there is absolutely no reason for me to buy it from AliExpress, but I know that not all regions have the same privileges as we have here in Europe, so this is not a bad motherboard, and if the price suits you, then you can buy it. Another motherboard is this Soyo A520 motherboard. This is the minimal and the cheapest AM4 motherboard I would buy from AliExpress. It costs only 62 euros, and if you want to assemble the budget AMD AM4 computer, this would be a good option with the Ryzen 5 5500, but just say bye-bye to CPU overclocking because A520 chipset doesn't support that. Intel motherboard options are a bit more plentiful, and for the LGA1200 I have 4 options. Let's start with this one, Maxun B660M Challenger, but this one is an updated version. You can see that it's black and red. I personally don't like how it looks, but I like the 2.5 gigabit network adapter. So this is upgraded version of the original B560M that I have tested on my channel, and actually right now it is even a bit cheaper, but when I made my slides it was more expensive than the original one, and that's why I picked original one in my combos. Anyway, this is supposed to be exactly the same B560M motherboard, but upgraded looks and upgraded network adapter. So for 81 euro, this is a very good deal. The other one is the original B560M that I have already tested. As you can see, these two are the same. One is just black, another one is black and red, and the upgraded version has faster network. Happens that the old one with a slower network is actually more expensive right now. Thus, if you don't mind this black and red look, I would go for the upgraded one. Then for the mini ITX lovers, we have this H510 ITX motherboard. It's also available as Maxun or Soyo, exactly the same motherboard, just slightly different look. VRM here I did not test, thus I can't guarantee that it will handle anything above i5-10400. The price tag for both versions is about 85 euros for Maxun or Soyo. Well, it's the same motherboard, so not a surprise that it costs the same. The final two motherboards are for the LJ1700, and they are also coming from Soyo or Maxun. The first one is the Maxun B660M Challenger that I have tested. The VRM here is rather decent. You can install i7-12700K, so you have some room for upgrades in the future, unlike the B560M that doesn't have much capacity for future upgrades. This motherboard costs just under 100 euros, so for B660 chipset this is a pretty good deal. The other option is a mini ITX with the H610 chipset and 2.5 gigabit network adapter for about 106 euros, and I believe this is one of the cheapest mini ITX LG1700 motherboards. Here you need to keep in mind that the motherboard comes without a Wi-Fi adapter, so you would have to install your own. Other than that, it seems to have okay VRAM, but since I didn't test it, I would not recommend anything higher than i5-12400, and the description itself also says i5-12400 or i3-12100. So if you're looking for LG1700 mini ITX motherboard and you're limited to AliExpress, then this is an interesting option. The final slide is about the rest of the components. So for the SSDs, I have already shown you the King spec SSDs. They are available in SATA and NVMe configuration with different capacities. And again, I recommend King spec, not because King spec is a good reliable brand, but because it's the best option from available on AliExpress. I personally have got about a dozen of these King spec SSDs and they are still working just fine. The worst problem I got with these SSDs is that the speed drops when you're copying large files or when you are installing games and doing lots of read and writes. Your system might be a little bit laggy because the SSD drive doesn't respond as fast as your system would want to, but they did not crash, they didn't die on me, and so far they all are still functional. Another option, if you for some reason don't want to buy King spec, is X-ray discs, and these ones are also available in SATA or NVMe, basically same thing. And again, I put here X-ray not because it's a good reliable brand and not because it's a manufacturer that you can trust, it's just because it's one of the possible options from AliExpress that I don't think is a complete disaster. Another section here is about the CPU coolers. Of course, we can go with the well-known 4-heat pipe Snowman, this tower cooler. It's a good cooler, but unfortunately the price has gone up. And right now, if you would buy a standard single fan cooler with a 4-pin PWM fan, it would cost you about 25 euros. And I think it's a bit too much because for this money you can buy a branded Cooler Master cooler. Then if you would want two fans, the price would go to 30 euros, so they are asking 5 euros for a fan. The prices are going up on AliExpress. So another option would be this Snowman with just 2 heat pipes. It's a bit cheaper. Let's pick PWM fan. And of course we can have only one fan here because they don't sell it with the 2 fan options. And then the price would be around 15 euros. So the other option is this low profile cooler that I recommended in my builds that I have tested a lot, and I like it because it is blowing air right onto the VRAM and helps with cooling the VRAM. The price is also not the best, but it's also not too bad. So it's about 17-18 euros, somewhere between 4 and 2 heat pipe Snowman. But if you want something completely dirty cheap, then I found this one. And this one has just 2 heat pipes. It's a tower style cooler. And if we pick no RGB, no lights, and then the price goes to under 11 euros. I bet this cooler will be better than the stock Intel cooler. The price is just 11 euros, so if you need something dirty cheap for your i3-10100 or i5-10400 or maybe Xeon E5-2640 then this will do the job just fine. And the one last thing I would like to cover is a power supply. Again, I strongly do not recommend to buy power supplies from AliExpress. If you have a possibility to buy a power supply from a known brand from your local store, please do that, even if it is more expensive than on AliExpress. But if you're absolutely out of options and you need to buy a power supply from AliExpress, or maybe you're having a hobby AliExpress only build, then I can recommend this power supply according to the specs specified by the seller. So what do we have here? This power supply gives us 600 watts output, and it promises 48 amperes on the plus 12 volts rail. It also promises that it accepts 110 and 220 volts as input and 50 or 60 Hz as input. This is supposed to mean that the power supply is able to tolerate fluctuations in the input voltage, but again, this is just the specification. It doesn't guarantee that the Chinese manufacturers actually implemented all these features, but still, at least they have this specification. Also, I have tested the Flex ATX power supply from the same store or the same manufacturers, TF Skywind International. So if I would be limited to AliExpress and if I would have to buy a power supply on AliExpress for a budget build, then this would be the power supply I would buy. But again, please just buy a power supply in your local store. Finally, I have covered everything I have prepared for this video, so I hope it was interesting and I hope I helped someone find some interesting deals on AliExpress. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, bye bye.